Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Lamakaan welcomes you all. This is a very interesting talk because for the last maybe less than 10 days, this is the third talk in the series. And this time, Dr. Fatima Shahnaz, Professor Emeritus, has volunteered to give a peekaboo into the entire monument and also its history, preservation, and the rehabilitation for the public use. And I was just going through some of the articles written on Irrum Manzil. Then I came across this beautiful couplet which I wanted to dig in. जहाँ तेरे नक्शे कदम देखते हैं, खियाबा खियाबा इरम देखते हैं. So Irrum is something which is quite marvelous as paradise. So that's why they have kept the name. And it is also interesting to note that the hearing was adjourned to today. I don't have the developments. I was speaking to Anand sir about the developments. And again, it is adjourned, I think. 22nd, right? So those developments also Fatima Shahnaz is going to talk. So she will first going to speak about the history, how the building has come into existence, and then it's the need for its preservation, and also about how the collective heritage can be preserved to make the best use for the public. So Fatima Shahnaz is the daughter of the soil, born in Hyderabad, but educated in Europe and also worked in US. She is, wearing multiple hats. Of course, she has retired as professor of political science, but she's also an advocate of international human rights, and she's always been in the front line for human rights or gender-based violence against women, and she's always raised voices against the underprivileged, marginalized, or injustice done to the communities. And she is also a journalist, and she has written books. Her books are also on display here. Maybe you can grab a copy after the end of the talk. She's ready to sign one of those copies. And yeah, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Fatima Shahnaz.
An Urban Acts Commission whose job is to protect, conserve, and preserve heritage and ancient structures. Additionally, according to Advocate Niru, India is a signatory to the World Heritage Convention, WHC, and it is the duty of local governments to respect the WHC. The lawyer argued that the 2017 Act compromised the Constitution, which entrusted a duty on all governments and citizens to protect our ancestry in all forms. It was for this reason that the petitioner, Pasham Yadagiri, a senior journalist, filed this plea through his NGO. The bench verified whether in the past both the Heritage Conservation Committee and Urban Arts Commission functioned jointly. It also questioned the lawyer whether the court has to restrain the state in such matters. To which the council responded that the courts can intervene as the state had already destroyed a huge list of heritage buildings arbitrarily. Well, there you have it in a nutshell. Although the court hearings are ongoing, and I would not like to jump to hasty conclusions while the case is sub judice, and we must entrust justice and our heritage to our judiciary. So what's at stake is a city, a people, and our natural cultural repositories. Any visitor to Hyderabad or those interested in studying the evolution and urbanization of the city is struck by the quantum leap from the elaborate medieval architectural designs of the Qutub Shahi period to the streamlined classical symmetry of Irrum Manzil Palace. You can see the change just by going to the Qutub Shahi tombs and then seeing Irrum Manzil, which is extremely westernized and classical. The sense of perspective that Nawab Fakhrul Mulk had for the expansion of the city, in which he played a defining role as a leader and a politician, is not only modern, it's almost patented on Western urban planning in cities like Paris, in France. So when you see 19th century architecture in Europe, you can see that his vision of Irrum Manzil and where it stands is sort of according to Western neo-colonial and colonial architecture and urban planning, as our architects would probably confirm. Nawab Fakhrul Mulk was no decadent Oriental potentate or feudal anachronism, as the Nawabs of Hyderabad are often stereotyped. Basically, I guess that my generation probably disappeared because of this terrible stereotype of decadent Nawabs, who mostly lived on biryani. So, since Hyderabad's history under the Asif Jahi's dynasty was literally airbrushed by derogatory propaganda since Hyderabad's assimilation into the Indian Union in 1948. So it was sort of a politicized stereotype to show the Nawabs as decadent. Due to the seventh and last Nizam, Mir Osman Ali Khan's holdout as the last and largest princely state in India to join the Union, and the military standoff that followed, decimating hundreds of Hyderabadis, the city and its dazzling history were virtually marginalized in mainstream India since the police action, as the debacle was called in 1948. But in the neoliberal age, that is recently, mostly for commercial reasons, the city is back on the map again, with a younger population that is already making a difference in urban lifestyles. However, the danger is precisely that the new millennials might be uprooted and cut off from their root culture, which is why the current demolition of historic sites is so dangerous. It deprives youth of a connectedness to the past, and hence even to relinking with their own cultural identity or their diversity. That's why in other words, young people today have a very uniform and standardized cultural model, which in the US has been called the McDonaldization of culture, meaning nothing but shopping malls and buildings, high-rises that all look alike, and all cities look alike. But this is not America. That's why it's important to study our own history and the historic figures who shaped it, the nation builders and empire builders of men like Nawab Fakhrul Mulk. This may be crucial in understanding why Irrum Manzil and his vision of building his palace on a hillock on the city outskirts was intended as a symbol of Hyderabad's multiculturalism and unique Ganga Jamni heritage, which was inclusive of all the peoples, castes, and creeds that lived in Hyderabad, and by extension, the Deccan dominions of the Nizam. The name itself, Irrum, was a derivation from the local Telugu and Farsi, which had been the former court language before Urdu. Nawab Fakhrul Mulk used the dual meaning so that the Telugu-speaking people could identify the landmark, since Irrum means red, the red soil of the Deccan, and in Farsi the name means heavenly abode. Nawab Fakhrul Mulk was a game changer who broke the old boundaries, as he was the first to leave his palace in the old city of Hyderabad, where the aristocracy lived, and moved to expand the city limits in the suburban wilderness. He had virtually autonomous powers in his domain and the state, holding important portfolios as Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Law, Minister of Interior, Police, and other offices. He was an iconic figure of the Ancien regime under the two Nizams, the 6th Mir Mahbub Ali Pasha and the 7th Mir Osman Ali Khan. And he was also related to the legendary Salar Jung I, second, to the legendary dynasty of the Salar Jungs, or prime ministers of Hyderabad. Salar Jung I, the second, and the third, all reformers and modernizers of Hyderabad. Salar Jung I was regent of the state twice. Firstly, when he took over as acting ruler when Mahbub Ali Khan became the Nizam at the age of 3. So you can see Fakhrul Mulk's connections were with actually a very powerful family and a ruling class. Mahbub Ali Pasha invited Fakhrul Mulk to accompany him on trips to meet British viceroys, visiting royalty and dignitaries, since Fakhrul Mulk's charismatic personality and knowledge added luster to the Asif Jahi regime. Nawab Fakhrul Mulk's vision of urban expansion was not just a pioneering project, but one that revealed strategic statesmanship, geographically Irrum Manzil is a pivotal hub of the city. It's located at a junction connecting Panjagutta, which was a wilderness when the palace was built, to the roads forming a radius through Begumpet to Secunderabad, the modern area of Hyderabad, which the 7th Nizam, Mir Osman Ali Khan, developed to house the British contingents of his troops. And on the other side lie the unmapped territories of Banjara Hills, an uninhabited area that was mostly rocks and jungle shrubbery. We must remember that the period in which the palace was built was one of tremendous engineering projects and technological and industrial innovations, like the British railway system, connectivity through roads and dams, waterways and reservoirs, all undertaken in Hyderabad under Mir Usman Ali Khan's regime. And earlier by Salar Jung I, who literally brought Hyderabad into the modern age. You probably, or some of you may not know, that Nawab Fakhrul Mulk donated his personal palace, Asad Bagh, which is currently the Nizam College, with an adjacent school called Madrasa Alia, to the Nizam, who liked it, who thought it was beautiful, and he just donated it, and it became the Nizam College. So he was very interested in developing education in the city. Similarly, Nawab Salar Jung donated what is now the Secunderabad Club for the British soldiers to have some sort of recreative place. So when they built palaces, they were not selfish motives. They were actually intended for public use in many ways. From Irrum Manzil, Nawab Fakhrul Mulk had a bird's eye view, a spectacular sweep of the Hussain Sagar Lake in the distance, and the city sprawling beneath. Now, as many of you know, there is no view. And the Hussain Sagar Lake is a stinking mess. The other day I read it was spewing white foam. I mean, this was not the case under the Nizams, or even under the engineers of the period, or the urban planners, for that matter. Directly, almost parallel to Irrum Manzil, a straight road leads to what has become the Bombay Highway today. So you just see the perspective of this castle on the hill and the road leading straight to Maharashtra, which was extremely important for the Nizams and the Deccan. And also as a conduit for heavy trade and transport of goods from Maharashtra to Hyderabad. So he already had this vision of urban planning. On the same road in the Amirpet neighborhood at Eragadda, Fakhrul Mulk constructed another gem of a palace, Irrum Numa, which has been transformed. I think when activists speak of visiting heritage sites, they should go to Irrum Numa and try to restore it, because it's a real eyesore. It's disgraceful. It's been turned into a tuberculosis hospital, which is so unhealthy that people are literally lying around in corridors. But that was a beautiful palace. And from what I heard from my father, the ladies in the family who didn't go out, who were in Parga, used to skate in Irrum Numa in the big hall there. Roller skate, or play ping pong, or badminton. These were the sports that the ladies used to play. That is, if some of my cousins weren't sharpshooters. Never underestimate a begum, because if you look behind that sari, there may be a gun. And I can tell you, I had an absolute allergy to guns and horses and polo and shikar. I was one of the sort of freaks who completely hated any blood sports and violence. So even the ladies were very tough at the time. Maybe that's why I dropped out and lived in the West. So anyway, to come back to the junction, that Panjagutta was a junction, a wilderness, when the palace was built. And Banjara was, of course, off the maps. It was nowhere. This, again, as I said, the period the palace was built was one of industrial and engineering projects, technological innovations, like the British railway system and all the roads and dams, the waterways and reservoirs undertaken under Mir Usman Ali Khan's regime, not to mention the High Court, the Assembly, and the hospital, Osmania Hospital. So all of these brought Hyderabad into the modern age. Something that, probably the only thing that interested me as a human rights activist was when I wondered about the High Court. And when people talk about the Nizam being eccentric and a miser and the whole anachronistic, I wondered why the High Court moved to Hyderabad. And this is fascinating. In his own quiet way, he rebelled against the British, because the High Court was in Madras, the British High Court. So he wanted to make Hyderabad autonomous. So he built a court here, so that Hyderabad would have its independence and an independent judiciary. That's how modern he was. And Osman Ali Khan, as far as I heard, was pretty brilliant. He did write poetry, we know that. And he was eccentric, and he did have all the women and the harem and the whole thing. But besides that, he did support millions of people, because his kitchens, his dairies, apparently were feeding half the city, or whoever wanted to eat. So people were not starving in Hyderabad. From Irrum Manzil, as I said, the Nawab had a bird's eye view of all the way to Eragadda and the highway to Bombay. The blueprint, even and beside Eragadda, the palace, there is a mausoleum where Nawab Fakr and his family are buried. And it's made of all this incredible granite of the Deccan, the stone. It's very beautiful, and it has been declared a heritage site by INTAC. So that too, perhaps some of you would like to visit, because the architecture of it is quite unique. The arches, the whole Indo-Saracenic art, it's really a very beautiful building, and quite unique, because it's both Indian and also symmetrical with the Islamic architecture. The blueprint for a master plan for Hyderabad, as architects call it, was Nawab Fakr Mahmud's holistic layout and an eco-friendly vision. To use sociological terminology, holistic. He was very holistic in his constructions. This engineering feat encompasses the whole gamut of Hyderabad's urban expansion and development, besides its culture. The patterns, outgrowths, and offshoots of what we call Hyderabadi culture. The environment amalgamated the ecological, health, and psychological needs of a society. Today we all talk about psychosocial psychology and sociology, but this whole holistic vision encompassed all the factors and needs of a society in advance, which is a very modern concept. The courtly culture of Hyderabadi refinement, decorum, and etiquette, known as its adab and tahzeeb, permeated every class of society at the time, rich and poor, and traces of it survive in the multi-diversity of the peoples of Telangana and Andhra, and even as far as Maharashtra and Karnataka today. The Deccani culture was a very rich culture, a multi-layered culture. It was not uniform, and it cannot be stereotyped as just the Asif Jahi or the Mughlai. It actually changed enormously from the Mughlai cultures of Lucknow and Delhi. Hyderabad recreated, reinvented its own personality and cultural diversity, because there were so many different types of people, races, ethnic races and religions and creeds and castes living here. People spoke Telugu and Marathi and Kannada, and so many different languages. So all of this was taken into account by the rulers of that time. And of course, the Deccani Urdu was influenced not only by Marathi and Kannada, as I said, but by Hindi, Sanskrit, Persian, Turkic, Arabic, and other languages, not to mention English. From the Indo-Italianate facade of Falaknuma Palace to Irrum Manzil, with its Indo-Baroque and Europeanized blend of Deccani antiquity and Indo-Saracenic and Persian strands, added to a colonial austerity, we see the innovative experiments of Hyderabad's modernizing rulers. However, like the British residency built at around the same time as the White House in Washington, which is immaculately maintained by the American people and government, historical buildings like Irrum Manzil or the Arts College at Osmania and the residency have been abandoned in a shoddy state of neglect, as you all know. So even the Americans are conserving their cultural heritage buildings. But here we have stuff that's far older, and we just let it rot. So this is something I think that conservationists and activists today are very worried about. At this juncture in my description, I would like you to excuse me for going back to a description from a personal source in my vision of the past, which is, according to my own father, Nawab Mir Mozam Hussain. Perhaps he was the last living eyewitness who had first-hand insights into Irrum Manzil Palace. As my dear friend Asif here knows, since he knew my father, who was, as you know, quite a legend for Hyderabadis. My father was born in Irrum Manzil, and he lived and grew up there. By the time of his death in 2013, at the age of 98, he had almost a century's memories of Hyderabad's dazzling past and history, as well as a darker period in 1948, which is called the police action. This history is so vivid, so rich, that I really can't cover it all. There's such a sort of convulsion of images in my mind that it's very hard to streamline everything and stick to a few points. I think my father hero worshipped his grandfather, Nawab Fakhrul. He literally saw him as a towering Napoleon, a conqueror, a genius, a Caesar, I don't know, but I mean, the stories I heard bored me to death, because all I heard was Fakhrul Mulk and Salarjung. And honestly, it was like, and for me, it was all totally patriarchal. The culture was patriarchal. So I literally went off to sleep through the stories. But now, I think by osmosis, something has stuck out. And you'll see that in Golconda, in that novel, how it came out. I'll briefly digress to say that it was the end of the feudal regime and the rise of Republican India, which I've described in my historical romance called Golconda, and which I wrote in New York, as I said, published by News India Times. From my father's comments after the book was read to him as he was blind, Hyderabad at the time of this book was precisely, apparently, as I've described it in my novel. My father was shocked. Relatives of the Nizam today also told me that my description of the old city across the Musi River was exactly as it had been in that period. The Havelis, the Dioris, I don't know, it all came out in this book. So people commented that this novel could only be an insider's view of Hyderabad. Although I tried to be as cryptic as writers are about their sources, and I leave that conclusion to you, my readers, as I have the copies here, and you can make up your own mind about how much I must have known or experienced any of it, although I didn't live in any palace and was proud of being, just like everybody else, an ordinary Indian citizen. You read this novel, you will see that Irrum Manzil might rise from the ashes again. It might come alive. So I think we may see a rebirth, a renaissance of Hyderabad through this entire miserable experience. And there might be hope. My father was a brilliant raconteur, a historian, who regaled us with his war stories about Hyderabad. The Prime Minister, as I said, Salarjung, whose art collection is in the Salarjung Museum, rated one of the world's largest collections by a single man. Very close to Salarjung, my father called him Yusuf Chacha. He was also apparently the favorite grandson of Nawab Fakhrul Mulk, and his character allegedly most resembled his grandfather's. He had the discipline, shrewd administrative skills, the intelligence of his grandfather, and his commitment to public service. Before the police action in 1948, my father worked as an officer in the Hyderabad Civil Service. He was actually, which was modeled on the British civil service in India. He was even nominated towards the end, before the police action, nominated as Chief Minister of Gujarat. But then the political events changed the whole scene. He was deployed as a district officer in the Adilabad region, where he worked for years among the Gonda tribals. Then after 1948, when the old feudal order saw a regime change to Republican India, he moved abroad working with the United Nations subsidiary UNESCO. And as he had a prodigious memory, he would tell the children in our family about growing up in Irrum Manzil, a dreamy, make-believe place like Camelot, which for our generation was unimaginable and unreal. So I think the best way to describe that period would be in his own words, which have been documented in a book and an interview with my father in the 1980s by the British writer William Dalrymple, who wrote White Mughals and others, and who visited my father in Hyderabad. At that time, just out of Cambridge, a young man with a backpack, Dalrymple found a mentor of Indian history in my father, Mir Mozam Hussain. I think William epitomizes the romantic love story of the British for Hyderabad, as he wrote, I quote, "This was India's Shangri-La, a land of palaces and harems ruled by a mad and moneyed despot. He was clearly fascinated by its diamond-studded, gin-soaked past. Not that I've seen many diamonds, have you? Since then, I'm not sure about all that, but anyway, he was fascinated. An interesting anecdote I'd like to add is that he was introduced to my father by a mutual English friend who, like many other European ladies, had either been a guest, and she herself was the sister of the British Prime Minister. And like many other European, now this was the level of ladies that Nawab Fakhrul Mulk associated with from Europe. She had been, like other European ladies, a guest, either a guest in Irrum Manzil Palace, or like Betty, the wife of the famous anthropologist from Cambridge, Dr. Christoph von Führer-Heimendorf, a close friend of my father's, temporarily serving in Nawab Fakhrul Mulk's entourage. She was taken into the palace, as many English and European women had been in the service of the Nawab as tutors of my father's sisters and family women, as aristocratic women did not study in schools outside the palaces. So it's with some humility that I must admit I was the first woman in our family to earn a PhD from the Sorbonne University in Paris, which was unheard of, and the first Asian and Indian head girl of my English boarding school in Europe. I recall that my grandfather, Nawab Razed, Nawab Fakhrul Mulk's fourth son, enjoyed writing to me when I was at my English boarding school. And perhaps because of his own memories of his school days in England, my bond with him increased at the time, but unfortunately he died before I left school. He and 4 of his brothers had been sent off to Eton College in England by Nawab Fakhrul Mulk, and their weekends were allegedly spent having tea with Queen Victoria at Windsor Castle. But as westernized as the elder Nawab was, by the time his sons were shipped back to India, he made them stay in Bombay for a month to relearn the Hyderabadi adab and tehzeeb, courtly decorum and Indian traditions. He would not allow them into his presence until they wore their sherwani, their dastar, and the whole regalia, the court dress. Betty Heimendorf was taken in at Irrum Manzil Palace when Heimendorf, an Austrian, had been briefly detained by the British during World War II because he was suspected of being sympathetic to the Germans. Another famous person who had served as governess for my aunts at Irrum Manzil was Mrs. Jardine, mother of the famous Jardines, founders of the East India Company in Hong Kong. And you may know that at some point the East India Company, before it became imperial, was pretty close to Hyderabad. And to add to Nawab Fakr Ulmulk's unbiased outlook, his own doctor was a German Jew who would be summoned from Bombay when necessary and who was an intimate of the Nawab's inner circle. Dalrymple asked Mir Mozam about the changes he found in Hyderabad in the post-independence period, and he spoke with poignancy about losing one's heritage and historic memories. His reminiscences as an old man make one relive the vanished world he had once known and was now lost. I know he was brutally aware of the ominous signs ahead. I quote Dalrymple and my father speaking in the interview. My children tell me you mustn't live in your memories, and they're right, of course. That's why I never go back to the old palaces where I spent my childhood. At every step, they're fragments of history. And frankly, it breaks my old heart to see them as they are today. This was in the 80s, and look at us now. 40 years later, we're going through the same crisis. Yet he never failed to entertain family members and us as children with his tales, as I said about my father, who said that Fakr Ulmulk had the mansion building mania. Not only did he construct several palaces around the city, but he spent lavishly on schools and educational institutes, for engineering and the urban development of the city, as I said. At the time when Osmania Hospital had not yet been built, he opened up Irrum Manzil as a hospital for special cases with 3 doctors and nurses on hand, with specialists called in from Bombay. Foreigners would visit Hyderabad, attracted by Nawab Fakr Ulmulk's magnanimous hospitality and generosity. From my father's descriptions, guests were received by a reception committee like visiting royalty. The elder males first stood in line along the grand staircase. Then the grandsons, in full court regalia, would receive them, bowing in the Hyderabadi adab. The foreigners were awed and bedazzled by the splendors of Hyderabad and the hospitality of the Nawab. But to get back to the interview Dalrymple had with my father, I think it speaks volumes about the ambience in Irrum Manzil. Mir Mozam Hussain disparaged the mythologized version of the aristocracy that lingers in the public imagination. So I quote from Dalrymple's book, The Court of Kali, renamed at the Court of the Fish-Eyed Goddess. Fibs, Mozam Hussain said. That's what every one of your generation thinks I'm telling, at least when I talk about Hyderabad in the old days. You all think I'm telling the most outrageous fibs. The old man settled himself back in his chair and shook his head, half amused, half frustrated. My grandchildren, for instance, for them, the old world of Hyderabad is completely inconceivable. They can barely imagine that such a world could exist. But what exactly can't they believe? Asked Dalrymple. Well, the whole bang shoot really. The Nizam and his nobles and their palaces with their zananas, harem, and the entire what have you that went with the Hyderabad state. Mir Mozam is a sprightly and intelligent 84-year-old, writes Dalrymple, and with a broad forehead and sparkling brown eyes. Take the palace I grew up in, he continued. It was by no means the biggest, but it had a staff of 927 people, including 3 doctors. There was even a regiment of African women who were there just to guard the zanana. But tell that to my grandchildren. They've seen how we live today, and they just think that I'm making it up, especially when I start telling them about my grandfather, Fakr Ulmulk. He was a remarkable man, a great servant, of the state. But he was also, how shall I put it, a larger-than-life character. By the way, Dalrymple spells Fakhrul Mulk in the anglicized way, F-A-K-R-O-O-L, Fakhrul Mulk. And we've changed the spelling today. So, as my father said, he was a larger-than-life character. But you see, everything changed after the independence. After the Indian Army invaded and toppled the Nizam in 1948, that whole world collapsed. I left for Paris to work with UNESCO and barely recognized Hyderabad when I returned 20 years later. Almost all the great houses had gone. The aristocracy lost their status and their income after the fall of the Nizam. So they sold everything, land, houses. They knew nothing about business. Selling their heritage was the only way to make ends meet. Mir Mozam appraised the extent of the deterioration of his hometown, the changes in Hyderabad, on his return from the West. I hardly recognized the place. I arrived back with a friend who was head of a French bank. All the way I had been telling him about the wonders of Hyderabad, and particularly about the City Palace complex. I told him about the Blue Palace, the Green Palace, and most lovely of all, the Pearl Palace. So as soon as we arrived, we went over there. I found the chowkidar and got him to open the gates. Inside, it was completely flat. They had totally leveled it. Nothing was there except a few goats. I'll never forget the humiliation as I turned to my friend to try and explain what had happened. But of course, I soon discovered that it wasn't just the city palace. Almost all the great houses had gone. Even King Koti, the Nizam's palace, had been bulldozed, or at least most of it. There was one wing left, converted into some sort of hospital. In answer to Dalrymple's question whether it was the government that had confiscated the palaces, Mir Mozam replied, no, not as such, but the aristocracy lost all their status and their income after the police action. So they just sold everything, land, houses, even the doors and windows. They knew nothing about business, and selling their heritage was the only way they could make ends meet. The old man shook his head in disbelief, notes Dalrymple. Then Mozam Hussain continued, no one thought to protect anything. They just sold their history, just to survive. Now there's virtually nothing left, just dusty high-rise buildings everywhere. Outside Salar Jung's palace, for instance, was a garden easily comparable to the Jardin des Tuileries. I'll never forget its shady walks and ancient trees, its soft green lawns and parterres bursting with flowers. There was an octagonal fountain so large you could row about it in a skiff. Now it's a filthy lorry park. So much was lost unnecessarily through sheer ignorance. With regard to the Fakhrul Mulk family, Mozam Hussain observed, Fakhrul Mulk died soon after the fall. How could he adapt to the changes? Of course he couldn't. After that, the family simply disintegrated. Some have gone to the Gulf and Bahrain, others to Pakistan. Now we are scattered to the winds, and Irrum Manzil, Fakhrul Mulk's last palace, is a government office. It's just around the corner from here, but it's almost unrecognizable. You wouldn't believe how they vandalized it. For me, it stands as a symbol of all that has happened to this town. Dalrymple asked if Mir Mozam would show him the place. Why not? Said Mir Mozam. I'd be happy to do so. The old man got to his feet and called for his stick. 2 minutes later, we were heading through the new housing estates that everywhere seemed to be springing up around Hyderabad. He continued, when I was a boy, all this was part of my grandfather's estate, said Mir Mozam. In those days, it was miles outside the town, 500 acres of land, all beautifully maintained. Where these houses are, that was my grandfather's 9-hole golf course. The first hole is under the Oberoi Hotel, which must be the Taj Krishna. The first hole of the golf course is under the Oberoi Hotel. See those shacks? That was a polo field. And that mess over there, that was the Palace Orange Groves. It's impossible to visualize now. We turned down a gradient and drew up outside a large office complex. On the gate was posted the stenciled notice, Government of India, Office of the Engineer-in-Chief. This was it, said Mir Mozam, pointing ahead. Unrecognizable. At this point, I'll again repeat a part of the article which pretty much sums up what so many people may be feeling today when they reminisce on a vanished heritage. As Mir Mozam told the writer, at every step, there are fragments of history. And frankly, it breaks my old heart to see it like this. Anand, you said you knew that land. 500 acres. He said he knew it all. We get some insights into the legendary stature of Nawab Fakhrul Mulk, the scope and pioneering magnitude of his vision for the future of his city, literally etched in stone, as he was a voracious builder, and the buildings were his language, his expression for posterity. If we understand the buildings as architects do, as archaeologists do, we may unearth our own history. Tell me about him, Fakhrul Mulk asked Dalrymple. Mozam Hussain picked up his reminiscences again. Well, where shall I start? You see, although my grandfather was Deputy Prime Minister in the Nizam's government, his real passion was building. Over the course of his life, he built this great series of vast, rambling palaces. But he was never satisfied. As soon as he had finished one, he immediately began to build another. Sometimes he would just give an entire palace away. Of course, he built up enormous debts in the process. The Nawab would tear down his extravagant buildings as fast as he built them, his creative genius moving on to some other project. As I said, his palace Asad Bagh was given to the Nizam and became Nizam College. He also tore down buildings that his engineers had failed to erect according to his plans. He once told his architect to pull down one where the door, he claimed, was too narrow for him to go through with the resident's wife on his arm. Now that may lead some of us to wonder at his diet. That must have been a damn big door that he had to go through with the resident's wife on his arm. And which, based on my father who got to eat at his grandfather's dinner table, his appetite was phenomenal. A gargantuan exploit in itself. And I won't have time to count the number of eggs he ate. It was considered a special honor that as the favorite grandson, my father got to eat leftover morsels from the Nawab's own plate. So as he ate, he would give a morsel to his favorite grandson, which was an honor. And this grandson would salam with a very deep bow and eat the leftovers even if he didn't like them. Now, as for the other male exploits of the great man, I hate to disappoint you, although you may read a lot of stuff in Golconda which is sex and violence, but there was an absence of salubrious gossip concerning Fakhrul Mulk. No scandals. So you may have, if you want scandals, sex and violence, which is the American recipe for fiction, you have to read my book. Anyway, actually my father, when he read the book, never commented on the shocking stuff in there. I think he actually enjoyed it. So anyway, so to talk about the gossip, there wasn't any, especially with all the philandering Nawabs of Hyderabad, including some of his own sons, who allegedly had the glad eye. And from what I've heard, whole villages are populated with people, descendants, God knows whom. So, you know, these guys had phenomenal sexual appetites, but they had the glad eye, as I said. Now, Fakhrul Mulk was a disappointment in this scene. According to my father's narratives of the cloak and dagger intrigues and family secrets, the proverbial skeletons in family closets, the big man was a dithering little boy when he was confronted by his Begum. Apparently, Begum Fakhrul Mulk was really the power behind the throne. And she walked around with a stick. So, and she was not just a power, but a force to be reckoned with. Like Catherine de Medici, of the Queen of France, she had her network of female spies in the men's apartments, and she knew of every Anglo-Saxon white lady her husband associated with even before the sun was up and the champagne party was over. Her spies would report everything to her. And if, for instance, since she was highly religious, if, unlike Fakhrul Mulk himself, who was very secular and who didn't particularly enjoy the religious rituals that his wife imposed on him in Muharram and the Majlises, she was pretty religious, but he wasn't. Whenever a foreign lady, a white woman, visited her, apparently she would immediately wash her hands. So the Nawab also had his spy network, and he didn't fail to get news from the palace Amazon soldiers, the women who communicated between the Mardana and Zenana about his wife's particular mood of the day, because he knew that, you know, all hell would break loose if she wasn't in a good mood. But the couple were a strange anomaly in Hyderabad's arranged noble marriages between incestuous clans. Everybody married cousins. And they were very deeply bonded. Every morning, reading the Bulletin or Times over his cup of tea with his Begum on his balcony, Nawab Fakhrul Mulk, dressed in full courtly apparel, would contemplate the military parade of his troops, his own private army, in the front grounds of Irrum Manzil. There was also a Naubat band, which is the traditional Hyderabadi music, or actually Central Asian, which came with the Mughals into India and so on, and which Hyderabad adopted. So at the gate, where you see the gate, there would be a Naubat band which announced all the guests so that everybody in the palace knew that someone was coming in. So he would examine his army, and he had the absolute powers of a monarch in his domain, with his own seal, crest, army, and autonomous legal system over which even the Nizam had no authority. Again, we see the contrasts in Dalrymple's trip to Irrum Manzil with my father. I quote, Mir Mozam pointed ahead. I looked to where he was pointing. From among a cluster of shacks and lean-tos and concrete outhouses clinging to the central building like barnacles on an oyster, you could see the outlines of being a magnificent palace. That's Irrum Manzil. But garages had been built in front of the central portico, obscuring the symmetry of the facade. The paint was peeling, and air conditioning units hung out of every arched window. An air of neglect hung over the whole complex, almost completely masking the grandeur of the original plan. I think the next passage will be interesting to anyone today who has wished to stroll through Irrum Manzil, to study its history and architecture, which are depicted vividly in graphic detail by my father. He said, "You used to arrive through a gatehouse with 2 double-storied towers. A bugler would blow as you passed. The bugler's name was Joseph, and he used to play the reveille first thing in the morning and sound the retreat each night at sunset. But they bulldozed the tower long ago. To one side, over there where that ugly garage is now, used to be the tennis courts, and beyond were the French gardens, with their fountains playing. On the other side, at the bottom, there was a big lake. As you drew up in front of the palace, at a sign from the Major Domo, the band would play God Save the Nizam and God Save the King Emperor. Later, after a game of tennis, you used to have tea on that terrace over where that temple is now. We walked together around the complex, Mir Mozam pointing out where the Zenana stood before it was bulldozed, and where the Somalian Zenana guards used to drill. Here was the pool they used to fill with colored liquid to play Holi. There the hall where Muharram was celebrated and where the Christmas tree stood. Over there, where they had now blocked up the arches, used to be the banqueting hall. At the end of Ramadan, on the night of Eid, the room was full to bursting with everyone sitting on the floor eating a great Mughlai dinner. I remember the Nizam coming here and the Viceroy and a whole succession of British residents. Outside, there would be gorgeously caparisoned elephants and horses with rich housings, palanquins and teams of palanquin bearers, 4 in-hand coaches, and subsequently Rolls Royces and Daimlers. I remember the tennis matches and trips to the Malakpet races and the shikar trips into the jungle. It all seems very long ago now. Then came the pointed question that we are asking ourselves again today, the future. When asked what he thought, what would survive of the old culture of Hyderabad, Mir Mozam shrugged his shoulders. Very little, he said. You can't keep out change. In 50 years, an entire world has been leveled, utterly destroyed. The process is nearly finished. I think that everything that is special about Hyderabad will go. Day by day, the old ways are disappearing. They're being replaced by monotonous standardization. What we had in Hyderabad was a very distinct Deccani culture, the product of a very particular mixture of peoples and influences. But much of that old elite went to Pakistan, and a flood of new people have come, bringing their own ways with them. What is left is on its last legs, and now there is nothing anyone can do about it. The old man took me by the hand and led me back towards the road. Today, Mir Mozam Hussain, my father, and his wife, my mother, Merunisa Begum, lie right next to the grandfather who loved him the most in the family mausoleum at Eragata. Both my parents are in that building, which is a heritage site. So as we've heard, there's some disturbing realities at stake today. The urban landscape of Hyderabad was, as we see, already radically changing in the 1980s, when the interview of my father with William Dalrymple took place. The changes should now be studied from the architectural and urban planning perspective. As we've seen, the city is rapidly being transformed from a historical site into uniformity through standardized modern architecture and a utilitarian outlook on the habitat. This is without assessing the real estate angle, the additional damages incurred through encroachments, and the developers who have no interest in restoration or conservation of these priceless landmarks of the city and its character, but in profiteering. Clearly, as the burning debate reveals today, heritage is being sold off, prioritizing predatory commercial and vested interests over history. It's an added disappointment in our troubled times that UNESCO, which has been so committed to the preservation of national cultural icons, issued a statement at the height of the Irrum Manzil debacle that Hyderabad is not a heritage city. I don't know what the basis was to make that judgment. One can only surmise from this that UNESCO, a pioneer in salvaging historic sites, is facing a very serious budgeting crisis and unable to defend more threatened global heritage landmarks. But in this process, it's also eroding its own credibility in the future for championing the cause of World Heritage Sites. So I think that UNESCO should wake up and come back and review this terrible statement that Hyderabad is not a heritage city. I think that's a blunder. So this default of an international cultural organization that one could entrust with salvaging our heritage today throws the ball right back into the courts of civil society and local and central governments, all of whom have emerged in support of Irrum Manzil's preservation. I mean, I'm talking about the central government and all the other parties. The conservation of the national heritage that's being sold off to foreign investors, multinationals, and vested interest parties is a dangerous depletion not only of our heritage, but a deletion of our history too. Soon, inflation will ensure, now this is really becomes a little bit sinister. The inflation will ensure that real estate in Hyderabad will no longer be affordable for the domestic population and native peoples, but will become showrooms for conglomerates like IKEA or Mercedes and foreign buyers. That is, what's left of land encroached on and plundered by land sharks. It's almost a catch-22 situation. If the government defaults on a constitutional duty, should civil society have a free rein, which raises law and order problems? But as I mentioned, in the past few days, the judiciary seems to have taken a strong hand in upholding constitutional rights of the people. In addition to the heritage problem, arise economic ramifications, with globalized markets overriding the humanitarian issue of population displacement and misappropriation of citizens' property rights. Irrum Manzil has been a property of the Indian government since the 1940s and 50s, when it was sold at a minimal cost to the government, with the caveat that it should be preserved and maintained in mint condition. Nonetheless, the current CM of Hyderabad justified his demolition plan as vastu, which raises fundamental contradictions concerning some pretty shady spiritual forces at work. For instance, there were 2 temples built by Nawab Fakr on his estate, where, along with a large mosque, only steps away from where the foundation stone was laid. One temple near the palace gate has allegedly vanished. The other, nearer the mansion, is reportedly still there, although this needs to be verified. And from what Sangamitra tells me, it doesn't look like the original, because she visited it. The little temple is new. So there are 2 temples that have vanished. And the mosque would be rubbled with the rest of the palace. So what about the spiritual vastus of these temples and mosques that would be a legitimate concern, I think, for everybody? There are also some political spin-offs of this problem, pertinent and disconcerting questions not only pertaining to heritage, but to craven corruption in governance. We have to entrust these issues as well to the legal procedure and judges of the court, who have so far been extremely meticulous and equitable in conducting the case. As we're hearing, the court is in process. With regard to the restoration of Irrum Manzil for public use, the funds to be used for demolition, for instance, could be recycled for repairs of the building. I think the urgency for repairing that building is now here, and probably for many other buildings. So the crores used, to 400 crores for the secretariat near Hussain Sagar, demolished and rebuilt, and another 100 crores for building the assembly at Irrum Manzil, those should be put in, I think, restoring all the old buildings that are crumbling. Irrum Manzil could have served as a perfect showcase and museum displaying Hyderabad's development in the modern period, its engineering, industrial and urbanization, the innovations in the 19th and 20th centuries during the Asif Jahi period. The railways, the engineering projects, roads, constructions like Osmania Hospital, the High Court buildings, the Assembly, as I said, and all the other iconic structures of the city, the dams and water reservoirs constructed under Mir Osman Ali Khan. We could have photographic exhibitions of all this evolution of the city. There are countless photographic collections in the city on this specific period that marked Hyderabad's transition into the modern era. And it's absurd to wipe out traces of the bridges that have been built between the past and future of this city. Taking an overview of heritage as a whole, it's obvious that the nation's heritage is both pre- and post-Kakatiya, as heritage experts recently declared, proving that Hyderabad has lost part of its heritage. They trace the city's evolution to the late Stone Age period, according to an article in the Hindu a few days ago. None of this has been adequately documented by the government. The heritage experts give us an idea of the dimensions of what is at stake. The article quotes the archaeologists and officials of the Department of Heritage, Telangana, who believe that, I quote, 9 out of 10 prehistoric archaeological sites in Hyderabad and its surrounding areas listed in the new Heritage Act of Telangana 2017 are no longer traceable. The sole surviving megalithic site is inside the University of Hyderabad at Lingampalli. Besides the encroachment of private lands and properties in government custody, there has been illicit and covert destruction and occupation of these sites. The archaeologist K.P. Rao of the University of Hyderabad, who has published a number of papers on the subject, stated, 10 years ago, when I visited the Hashampet site, it was on the verge of being occupied, as builders had dumped huge rocks to destroy evidence. It was a 30-acre site where the excavations during the British rule, 1862, and the Nizam reign, 1935, revealed a near intact megalithic site. So even the British and the Nizams had preserved heritage. The Mullah Ali site was disturbed much earlier. When I was studying in 1981, the location itself was a surmise. Mr. Rao noted that the eastern Telangana region bucked the Bronze Age period. All the evidence we have shows that the region missed the Chalcolithic age. We jump right from Neolithic age to Iron Age. The archaeologist has allegedly discovered a new 2.5-acre site in the southern campus of the University of Hyderabad with relics dating to the megalithic area. The dating of the sites was done with optical simulated luminescence. But not surprisingly, the Neolithic and megalithic sites were, I quote, at the same locations which are now most densely populated areas of Hyderabad. This means that where the heritage monuments are destroyed, there has been encroachment, there has been land grabbing, and slums or developing buildings and so on that have just wiped out traces of the heritage. However, inconsistencies emerge between official reports or denials and a document published by the Department of Archaeology in 1983. It would be fair to state that these encroachments and violations have been taking place even prior to the current government of Telangana, which of course raises the more alarming issue of endemic bureaucratic and official corruption in governments. From this angle, the issue of Irrum Manzil has a new urgency, since the precedents that have taken place regarding other vanished monuments in the past indicate that there is little recourse for civil society to take against powerful governments, a succession of governments, with huge financial budgets. The courts, civil society, and the media are the only hope in such cases. Mr. Rao gives another warning of how vestiges just disappear. I quote, "The undulating plains, the rocky knolls, and the ever-flowing Musi and its tributaries made it congenial for human habitation for thousands of years. As we all see, the lakes have disappeared." He continues, "Several Neolithic implements, generally dated from 2nd millennium BC to 1st millennium BC, were noticed near Tolukata, but no regular excavation was conducted here. But now officials of the department say they are not aware of the exact location, which is close to Charminar." End quote. An official of the Department of Heritage, Telangana, seeking anonymity, noted, I quote, "A few months ago, when we visited Singapore megalithic burial site in Huzurabad, we discovered the local people had disturbed the stone foundations and had turned the location for Batukama celebration. Due to urbanization, many of the sites in the city have disappeared. We don't even know the exact locations," he said. Finally, he added the relevance and significance of heritage to a people's identity. I quote, "When we lose these sites and the opportunity to excavate and study them, we lose information about our ancestors. They lived in the region and they are our links to the past. When we lose information about them, we lose a part of our identity. It is a long period cultural identity we are losing." End quote. This then has been the abysmal state of affairs in the conservation of our heritage sites, ancient and modern. And as I mentioned earlier concerning the transformation into public places, we see from the Golconda festival and the plays and musical evenings in the Qutub Shahi tombs that the old monuments can continue to be both rehabilitated and reanimated, used for developing the cultural life of the city, which would be an added tourist attraction, bringing in funds to the state treasury. We should use these old buildings as tourist sites, for exhibitions, for theaters. Visitors and the public do not tour official assembly buildings and offices, but arts and craft centers, food emporiums, museums, movie houses, where historic films on Hyderabad could be shown, or a city's modern lifestyle, And as I've mentioned on another occasion, there's always the possibility of using the building as the Palace of Versailles has been used in France for state banquets, or even a convention center for international meetings and seminars. There are so many more ways which heritage experts, architects, archaeologists, museums, and even students and young people who are here could suggest. As I said, Irrum Manzil itself could have been used as a theatre for performance arts and cultural exhibitions, or as a platform for showcasing the preservation of the tribal heritage of our Adivasis and tribes. For instance, the Gonda peoples of Adilabad threatened with extinction, as well as the feudal legacy of palaces and the grandeur of Hyderabad, which every Hyderabadi wears as an emblem of pride in our shared heritage. I don't know if many of you know that among the Gonda tribes, land has been seized and they have been displaced from their habitat. And even their religious rituals have been coercively changed. These are things that are happening in rural areas of our state and which we don't even know about. So the tribals also have to come into the picture, into this exhibition of Hyderabad. Hyderabad was, is, and continues to be a jewel in the crown of India. In conclusion, there may be a silver lining to the dream after all. On Wednesday, that's yesterday, the High Court set back the Telangana government's plans to raise the palace to build an assembly that would cost 100 crore. The secretariat complex built near the Hussain Sagar Lake would be at another cost of rupees 400 crores, as I said. The court said that Irrum Manzil still enjoys heritage status. And the court said that Irrum Manzil still enjoys heritage status, after hearing a writ petition filed by the social activist Dabara. Mr. Dabara challenged the state government's decision to do away with Regulation 13 of the Hyderabad Urban Development Authority, Huda Act, 1975. Amendments to the legislation do not list Irrum Manzil and several other heritage structures in the city under the protected monument list. The writ plea challenged the government order number 183, which listed the removal of the structures from the act. Additionally, the court said that 135 identified buildings could not be removed according to section 6 of the General Clauses Act, even though Regulation 13 of the Huda zoning regulations was repealed in 2015 by a government order. The state government had been citing the regulation that had been scrapped, claiming Irrum Manzil was no longer considered a heritage structure. Now, taking into consideration the General Clauses Act, the High Court has asked for a fresh response after hearing both sides. The case is adjourned till July 22nd. The Deccan is a rich cultural repository of centuries, as multi-layered as the mines of Golconda. It has always been a strategic crossroads in the heart of India, a multi-ethnic melting pot that has been the liberal haven of free thinkers, all-inclusive and not exclusive of any race, religion, caste, class, or gender. All who come to conquer the Deccan stayed here, charmed by the love this place, this region, this enchanted realm has radiated through its history. Today, even though the hearings regarding the demolition of Irrum Manzil will continue in the High Court for some time, we might assume that a tremendous triumph of our people has been achieved. The outpouring of support against the demolition by the Indian media across the board in every language, English, Telugu, Urdu, and even in Andhra and Karnataka, Maharashtra, it's unforgettable. Truly, the national media has proven it is the fourth pillar of our democracy. The hearings run by the High Court, brilliant judges and advocates, rekindled the dream of Hyderabad, where the Nizam built the first independent court in India. Outstanding activists, literally urban Amazons, like Lubna and advocate Rachana Reddy, Sangha Mitra, and social activists like Mr. Dabara, Sajjad, architects like Asim, sitting here, and Sanjay, where is Aman? Also. All these activists along with social platforms like Lamakaan with Naeem, Farhan and Kranti, and so many others in civil society, have restored the glory that was Hyderabad with their indomitable spirit and efforts. They've all restored faith in what this city and our democracy stand for: heritage, history, creativity and justice. And freedom and justice will always prevail here, for rich and poor, for all who visit Hyderabad, for all the Indian peoples and those who love our country and come here. And it is for this that we all unite to fight together. And of course, I must thank the central government, the BJP Bharatiya Janata Party and Prime Minister Narendra Modi for supporting the cause of right over wrong. Today, you've made history, because democracy means that the powerful must hear the voices of the defenseless. And to the Congress Party and all the other political agencies that have also taken a strong stand in this threat to our heritage, we say, Hyderabad opens its arms to you all, as it has over centuries. Hyderabad is your city, a proud Indian city. Our romance lives as vibrantly in the architecture of our monuments as in the hearts of our incredible diverse peoples. Hyderabad ki adab aur tehzeeb zindabad. Jai Telangana. Jai Hind.
Yesterday I went after a long time, and what I noticed is that people are not aware of the place because it is hidden completely, with lots of other buildings having come from the main road. You can hardly see it. So that's why a lot of people are asking, where is this Irrum Manzil, which is being, just spoken about and written about and everything. But you see, you when you go up and you take the U-turn and you're just going in, you see a whole lot of cars, the parking area, and the building which used to be visible is not now, because there is so much of other things which have come up. So after going right up, I saw what I had seen earlier, of course, many times.
And what did you see?
The building, the actual Irrum Manzil, which was in,
Well, how was it?
Well, I felt very, very sorry for it. It used to be pretty beautiful, even when I saw it, and that was like in the 80s and 90s, and after that, it's just downhill. Everything has gone downhill, and there were a whole lot of cars parked there, but everything appeared to be closed, and then there was this kind of a slope down which people who seemed to be working there, they were going down. There were no steps or anything. They were just kind of going to some other buildings over there. And there was this board saying some Telangana government, some office. And all that was there, went all around. It was in a real mess, and I felt very, very sorry. But this can be repaired, renovated, reused beautifully. There is no way this should be brought down. No way.
Well, hope. Let's hope.
Let's hope things start looking better after Monday, perhaps. Thank you.
Well, at least the good thing that's come out of all this is that I think the public is not only aware, but I think we're also aware of our constitutional rights. Suddenly, we've all woken up. I've heard here at Lamakaan that people have disappeared, journalists, because they spoke freely, and that there have been protests and police and whatnot. But I think now it's all out in the open. There is no more secret government, no parallel government, no whatever. I think everything has to be transparent. Transparency. And this is the people's right. This whole affair has actually brought out our constitutional rights too.
It was an immense pleasure to listen to your highly emotional and very dedicated lecture of life of Fakhru Mulk Bahadur, and in the kind of time he has spent in Irrum Manzil Palace. It was literally a walkthrough the life.
Literary walkthrough, lovely.
Yes.
Thank you.
To the query about what architects and their contribution in the present time. I'm an architect. My name is Asif. Um, During my academic career, I'm practicing architecture since past 25 years now. We have read history of architecture right from second year to the fourth year. Studied about Roman, Greek, Hindu architecture, Jain, Buddhist, North Indian temples, South Indian temples, various forms. But once those students reach to the final year of architecture, they get busy into the thesis and the project. And when they come into the professional life, they completely forget about history of architecture and its evolvement. And incidentally, in the modern times, the architecture has become very contemporary now. And there's no more fusion to grab the styles of what the previous classical architecture carried. I'm involved into heritage activities since 1 or 2 years, so that to bring out the awareness and try to safeguard the values of architectural heritage, at least for the next generation. I have compiled a brief categories of architectural heritage. For a layman to appreciate the historical buildings is you have to have a focus on the structure by itself, then grasp it, what exactly it is, then come out with it. Never forget what you're visualizing it. Never forget that. So I would like to share, Hyderabad's heritage can be divided into various categories. Sites which are in custody of Archaeological Survey of India and which are governed by the state government. That is directly from Delhi. Example, Qutub Shahi tombs, Charminar, Pagar tombs, and Foundry, which everyone is aware of. And the issue related now is Qutub Shahi tombs, with its restoration by Aga Khan Trust, which is ongoing now, has a potential to bag UNESCO World Heritage Tag Monument Award. But as the administration goes, by the recent permission given by National Monuments Authority to construct 54 villas in the vicinity of Qutub Shahi tombs, the parameters which are stated by UNESCO doesn't permit encroachments. It has to be clear of encroachment, so that the whole premises and the periphery of the monument, large monument like
also the World Heritage Foundation, also. These are the
Yes.
laws.
So, to think of it, deliberately somebody doesn't want a World Heritage tag to come to Telangana region, which is completely absent here. And the second point is sites which are in the custody of state government. First is infrastructure projects constructed by last Nizam Usman Ali Khan Bahadur, or prior to him, which were directly inherited by the state government. Example, High Court, Asif Jah Library, Osmania Hospital, and projects like that. The issue is the highest state of deterioration due to neglect. We can straight away blame the present ruling government or the past government also on this. Then the B is sites which are seized under Urban Land Sealing Act or evacuate properties, people who have left their properties and gone to cut it down. Example, various havelis, jodis, palaces, etc. Listing them is endless. Issue is the category is where our interest is.
Yes.
This Irrum Manzil falls into that category. Efforts are to be made to address such problems, which we can handle ourselves by creating awareness and things like that.
And also the court has now declared that it is a heritage.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
That's amazing. We should know the laws as well.
The third is the sites which still belong to the present Nizam, Ikram Jah Bahadur. They are in the custody through his GPA, Princess Asra.
All of them? All of them? Because Chowmahalla is one.
Chowmahalla Palace, Purani
No,
Haveli.
Chiran Palace up there.
Chiran Palace has been left out. It has gone under Urban Sealing Act. Some portion of 5 acres of land within the Chiran Palace has been given to Prince Mukunda. Otherwise, almost 350 acres of land is gone. The issue there is they want to plan a flyover through the forest land.
See, this argument, the Telangana government has actually used it against heritage laws by saying the families themselves are undecided or whatever. So we have to be very careful when there is a family dispute in a property that we don't get the government involved. That's another problem. So we should focus on land that is in the custody of government. Don't you think? I mean, I think that's logical. Because when it's a family dispute or legal matter, I don't think that we should involve ourselves, because then it gets into a very big legal case which is family oriented. This is civil. This is a different case, I think.
Yes, it's a different. So that's why we have to keep these kind of properties aside. We cannot involve ourselves there. There are so many other listings like we discussed.
Like for instance, you said, Asif, you said the Nizam's properties, right?
Yeah.
Well, we have to already know who is in charge of the Nizam's properties, because some of them are Ezra, some of them are not, and you know, whatever their family disputes are. The Nizam's trust, by the way, is a whole other issue, I think, because they have a trust.
They have a trust.
Yeah, they have a trust. So the rest of us don't. And we're talking about the properties that are not on, which are on the 162, you know, that are destined for demolition.
Then the religious sites in the form of temples
And
churches, old British, French, Armenian graves. They are in custody of missionary organizations. Temples are in the custody of endowments. Masjids, dargahs, tombs.
but again, in the religious monuments, it is again an international law issue and a constitutional law issue. The Charter of the United Nations. I mean, you can't demolish people's religious buildings. You can't desecrate. And also, I think the Indian Constitution, religious and heritage. So here we have constitutional and international law, both involved in religious monuments. So those are protected. Those are protected. But we are now talking of unprotected buildings. Now, you know what I mean? I mean, nobody can attack any religious monument by law. By law.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
This is Rafi from therehnuma.com. We are English online daily for a 100-year-old heritage newspaper, Rehnuma. So I just want to.
You don't have to tell me about it, because my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, not the Fakhrumuk side, the other side, was best friends with the owner of Rehnuma Deccan, the founder. They were very good friends.
Yeah. So my question for you is, like you have said all along, who is Fakhrul Mulk and what is the importance of Irrum Manzil and all. The same way this was also being said to the government. As we all know, the family of Fakhrul Mulk has did a press conference and also gave a representation to the government. I just want to know what was the response of the government and government officials in this regards. Normally we see
Zero.
what was the intensity of saying no, and why were they so stubborn, and they were not, they were like not paying a
Well, if they hadn't been so stubborn, one wouldn't go to court. Had they had, you see, this is when I talked about transparency. If there is transparency in government, these people are elected leaders. They have a right, we have a right to information, they have a right to respond. And they have to receive, I mean, if you take the US, I mean, America, they have the presidential press conference. They have to justify their actions. They can't operate in secrecy because there is transparency, you see. So by not responding, they've gotten themselves into this. They should have had a dialogue with the press, with the people, press conferences, with the family or whoever. And I think that that would have completely resolved the issue congenially rather than going into court. And, you know, I don't think that's a pleasant case at all. But I think that the government has acted in a very unilateral and almost, Yes, partisan is another point, you see, because discriminatory, because in a way, a lot of people have said this government is anti-Muslim and this, and they're destroying Muslim relics and Muslim vestiges of Hyderabad and all the rest of it. So this becomes a broader, it's like, as I said, a can of worms is opened up, because then the religious issue is brought in. And Hyderabad is already very sensitive to that, because after police action, people felt that the minorities were neglected and marginalized and the whole thing. And I think that this takes us into something that Lamakaan is very good at, which is the immediate political issues in Hyderabad, which often are polarized. And Hyderabad wasn't like that. Hindus and Muslims never had that feeling in Hyderabad before, in the pre-partition era. It's only after partition, you know. I mean, for instance, in other interviews with my father, I've read, and Golconda, you'll see that too in the book. He said very clearly, he considered it cowardly to go to Pakistan. See, and today, people have said, go to Pakistan. Who is saying go to Pakistan? In the point that, you know, like, this is the king saying, you know, off with his head. They can do whatever they want, you see. But in my father's day, people were free to choose. I mean, if they wished to go, they went. But he chose not to go. So why did he choose not to go? Because obviously, certain leadership, you know, Fakhrul Mulk's motto was, which was written above his house, was for king and country. So it was like a captain with his ship. He had to live and die here, you know. So, and he built for Hyderabad. He built for the city. So all these things are extremely important. And Asif here, by the way, is from a very old Hyderabadi family. So it's amazing that we have people so dedicated to the roots, not only of the culture, but the architecture. It's extremely important. I mean, the new generations. And he was talking about architecture, classical and so on. It's so important that modern designers don't even know the difference between a Greek pillar and a Roman pillar. And forget the 1,000-pillar temple in Warangal, the lotus pillars and all the other pillars that we have, the Indian pillars, you know, or the domes, the Turkish dome and the Arab dome. You know. Oh, you know more about Hyderabad than anybody.
No, I'm an outsider. I came here only in 2004, and maybe as a kid in 1867, and then again as a
yeah, but you're from Maharashtra, so you know the Deccan.
Yeah, I know it. But for example, you will be surprised, and this is like I bring in it like a humorous story, humorous plot, and when there's a reality. Till 3 months back, my only thinking about Irrum Manzil, even though I have read a lot about Hyderabadi history and all, was that there is some ruins. I mean, there's no palace in existence. Irrum Manzil is basically a government colony now, and there is no palace behind it. Till I heard from you, I was not aware. So I would like to invite.
From me personally or from the whole explosion?
More from you, because I interacted with you in the last few weeks. But
And I'm the wrong person.
no. But
I'm the gone again
but after
Hyderabadi.
I start reading on my own to figure out what the interaction was.
I'm not.
This is exactly what an outsider should be doing. I invite people who have come in here in the last 5 to 10 years to actually list out how many of the so-called, other than the promoted heritage sites, this is only from the point of view of culture and architecture that people talk about from heritage perspective. But here when we are talking about Hyderabad and Maharashtra, Marathwada, we're talking about food, we're talking about language, we're talking about behavior, we're talking about architecture, we're talking about razed, and we're talking about the Ganga Jamuna.
Go to Mysore and then you go to Gwalior. All of this is, and Orissa of course, and I mean Tamil Nadu, Madras. You know, this was all part of our Deccan culture. Gwalior, Mysore, that's Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. Oh, yeah. It's extraordinary how big, how broad the culture was. And by the way, if you go to the Purani Haveli Museum, you'll see the gifts from every community for the Nizam's Jubilee. The gifts that every community, the Sikh community, the Jain community, the Parsi community, everybody gave something for the Jubilee. So you can just see the communities there.
Thank you so very much. I just can't thank enough.
You're welcome, all of you. Thank you for listening, and please go on and work